She was just a bar girl. No diamonds, no designer heels, no fairy tale in sight. He was a billionaire, drowning in grief, walking into her world like a storm in a suit. One night, one moment. No promises, no names. But weeks later, 2 pink lines, a child, and a future she never saw coming. Alina had wiped the same glass 3 times, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do while her thoughts spiraled. The bar was dim, flickering with red and gold light, the jazz music soft but persistent like a heartbeat. At 2:17 a.m., most patrons had either stumbled out drunk or curled into the leather booths with empty eyes and overpriced wine, except for him. He sat at the farthest corner of the marble bar, alone, untouched scotch in front of him, a storm behind his stare. Alina had noticed him the moment he walked in. Tall, sharp suit, jaw clenched like he was at war with himself. The type of man who looked like he could buy the building, but tonight, he looked like he wanted to disappear in it. His tie was loose, his hands, those precise, elegant hands, were trembling. And for 20 whole minutes, he didn't say a single word. Alina wasn't the type to pry. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes safer than conversation. Working at Rose Hall Lounge, a high-end bar nestled between luxury hotels and law offices, meant she had seen every version of grief, lust, rage, and emptiness pass through those doors. But this man, he didn't carry emptiness. He carried weight. Something cracked, but it is still standing. Something human. She walked over slowly, the hem of her black apron brushing against her knees. "Need anything?" she asked gently. The man didn't look up. "Not unless you can turn back time." She smiled, not expecting a straight answer. "Sorry, we're fresh out of miracles, but we still have whiskey." He finally looked at her, and for a moment, everything else in the room vanished. His eyes were cold, but not cruel, just distant, as though whatever he'd been through had left him stranded somewhere far from where his body sat. "Alina," she said, nodding slightly, "if you're going to keep haunting my bar, I should at least know your name." The man let out a sound that almost resembled a laugh. Almost. "Damien," he said quietly. "Damien Wolf." The name meant nothing to her. Just another client, another sleepless soul. She poured him another glass not because he asked, but because his first one was still full. "You want to talk about it?" she asked. Not because she needed to know, but because sometimes asking was enough to keep someone breathing. He didn't answer, not right away. And then, "She was supposed to be my future," he whispered, as if the words were bleeding out of him. "And she died 2 weeks before our wedding. A drunk driver. She was on her way to pick up the cake." Alina's hands stopped moving. He didn't cry. Men like him didn't cry in public. But there was something far more violent happening behind his eyes. A collapse. A scream pressed down until it turned to silence. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and she meant it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. She just stood there while he stared into his glass, and the jazz music played something mournful. Eventually, he looked up again. "Why are you still here? Shouldn't you be running home?" She shrugged. "There's no one waiting." His brow furrowed. "Boyfriend." She smiled. "No, just my little brother. Asleep. And my mom. She doesn't remember my name most nights." Damien's expression shifted. Something cracked in him. Respect? Recognition? Whatever it was, it made him lean back and say, "Stay. Just for a little while. No talking. Just stay." Alina looked at her manager behind the counter. He gave a quiet nod. She untied her apron, walked around the bar, and took the seat beside Damien Wolf. They didn't speak, didn't drink, just sat. 2 strangers with pain stitched into their bones, breathing in the silence together. And that night, as the city slept and the world moved on, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not fate, but the beginning of something irreversible. Damien Wolf was a man people rarely said no to, not because he threatened, but because he never needed to. He walked into boardrooms, and entire buildings shifted to accommodate him. His signature on paper made markets tremble. CEOs, mayors, even ministers waited for his approval. And yet, none of them knew what it cost him to keep standing. After leaving Rose Hall Lounge that night, he didn't go home. Not to the penthouse overlooking the skyline. Not to the mansion nestled behind wrought iron gates. He drove instead. To nowhere in particular. Windows down, wind sharp. Her voice still echoing in his mind. "There's no one waiting." It haunted him, not because of how it sounded, but because it felt too familiar. He had met hundreds of women in tailored dresses and polished heels. Women who knew his name before he said it. Women who saw dollar signs before they ever saw a man. But Alina Paktumi hadn't asked for anything. She didn't flinch at his grief. She didn't try to fix him. She simply stayed. Like someone who understood what it meant to carry pain without needing to be rescued. 3 days later, he returned to the bar. Same booth, same scotch. She was wiping down the counter when she noticed him. "You're back," she said. "You're surprised," he replied. "I'm not used to people returning to what hurts." He took off his coat slowly. "Maybe I came back to what helped." She blinked at him, didn't smile, but didn't walk away either. They didn't talk about love, or loss, or what they meant to each other. They just existed. In quiet conversations, in slow burning stares, in the silence between 2 a.m. and sunrise. Sometimes he'd ask questions. "What would you do if you didn't work here?" "I'd open a flower shop, something small, a place people could walk into and breathe." Other times, she'd ask him things no one dared to. "Do you still love her?" He would pause. "Every day, but not in the way I thought. Not in the way that stops me from moving." It was never a game. They never kissed, until that one night. It had rained. The lounge was nearly empty. She'd closed up early, her brother home sick, her tips low, her body aching. Damien had waited outside, offering to drive her home. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." The car ride was quiet, headlights painting gold across wet pavement. At her apartment building, she lingered by the door, keys in hand. "Would you like to come up for tea?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. The tea sat untouched. The words got tangled. And somewhere between pain and comfort, between grief and gratitude, something shifted. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't planned. But when his hand touched hers, and she didn't pull away. The kiss happened. Soft, surprising, shaking. And what followed wasn't lust. It was something heavier. Something that came from two broken people needing to feel human again. They held each other like survivors of the same storm. They didn't speak when it ended. She curled into him. He stroked her hair. And in that moment, fragile, wordless, they both forgot the world. The next morning, Damien was gone. No note, no message, only a faint indent on the pillow beside hers. Alina sat up, blanket wrapped around her, heart unexpectedly aching. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself not to care. She told herself he wasn't coming back. And she believed that. Until 2 pink lines showed up 3 weeks later. The test sat on the edge of the sink, its pink lines screaming louder than any voice in her head. Alina stared at it without breathing, without blinking, without moving. She'd known something was off. Her body felt different, like it was speaking a language she didn't recognize. The nausea came in waves, her appetite disappeared, and her emotions rose and fell like a tide with no moon. But until this moment, she had held on to the hope that it was just stress, just exhaustion, just life being cruel. Not a baby. She sank onto the bathroom floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest, and let the silence break around her. No one else was home. Her little brother was at school. Her mother, still trapped inside her fog of illness, had been asleep since morning. And now Alina sat there, completely and utterly alone, with the knowledge that something was growing inside her, something that would change everything. Her mind raced. Damien. The name hit like thunder. She hadn't seen or heard from him in weeks. No calls, no messages, nothing. The man who had held her like she was air, who had kissed her like she was the only person left on earth, had vanished without a trace. Of course he had. He hadn't promised anything. They hadn't made plans. They were two strangers bound by pain, colliding in one moment of weakness. She had known it meant nothing to him. She'd told herself not to hope. But now there was a child. And no matter how she tried to rationalize, deny, or undo it, the truth was there. 2 lines, 1 heartbeat, 1 life, and no way back. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and imagined what it meant to raise a baby in a 2-room apartment, with a part-time bar job and a sick mother. She thought about baby formula prices, daycare costs, and hospital bills. She thought about shame, how her boss might react, how her friends would whisper, how her little brother would ask questions. But beneath the fear, beneath the rising panic, there was something else. A tiny, flickering warmth. A heartbeat that didn't exist yesterday. A connection she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. By the next morning, her decision was made. She wouldn't tell Damien, not because she hated him, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had seen what people like him did with problems. They erased them, replaced them, buried them under money. And this child wasn't a mistake. It was hers. She would raise it with whatever she had, even if all she had was $86 in a savings envelope and a name no one remembered. Weeks passed. Her stomach began to curve ever so slightly. She ate less, worked harder, and smiled when she didn't want to. No one at the bar noticed, yet. But her eyes grew softer when she touched her belly. Her fingers sometimes traced invisible shapes across her shirt when she thought no one was looking. And though the fear never fully left her, there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, where she imagined holding her child for the first time, where she whispered things into the air like, "I don't have much, but I'll love you more than the stars, and I'll never leave." What Alina didn't know was that Damien had returned to Rose Hall Lounge more than once, always after hours, always alone, asking the same question, "Is she working tonight?" And every time the answer came back the same. "Sorry, she left already." He never left a number, never left a note. He just sat in the same booth, staring at the glass she used to pour his drinks, wondering why the girl who once stayed beside him without asking for anything now seemed to be the one who had vanished. 3 months in, Alina stopped hiding. Her uniform stretched tighter across her belly now. And though she still wore loose jackets and avoided mirrors, the truth was no longer something she could tuck beneath layers. Some coworkers whispered, others stared, but no one asked, except Marcy, the bartender with bright red lipstick and a heart bigger than her mouth. "You gonna tell him?" she asked one night, sliding Alina a glass of ginger tea instead of coffee. Alina didn't need to ask who him was. "No," she said softly. Marcy's brows arched. "You serious? Girl, you're carrying the child of a man who walks like money and talks like sin. And you're gonna what? Raise it on tips and ramen noodles?" "I've done more with less," Alina replied, a small edge in her voice. Marcy held up both hands. "Hey, I get it. Just don't forget there's more than pride in this. That baby's gonna need more than your backbone." Alina didn't answer, because she knew Marcy was right, but she also knew the risk. Damien Wolfe didn't seem like the kind of man who welcomed surprise. And if he didn't want the child, or worse, if he tried to claim it, not for love, but to control it. She couldn't bear the thought. At home, her brother Jeremy started asking questions. "Why are you sick every morning? Why do your clothes not fit? Are you dying?" She laughed through the tears. "No, honey, I'm growing something beautiful. Someone." He frowned. "Like a pet?" She nodded. "Kind of, but louder and needier." He thought for a second. "I'll help. I can give my cereal and my blanket." Her chest broke wide open. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're gonna be the best uncle in the world." But not everyone offered love. Her landlord raised the rent the moment he noticed the bump. "Baby means more mess, more noise," he barked. "You want to stay, you pay double." Her mother, still drifting in and out of clarity, screamed when she saw the ultrasound photos. "You ruined your life, just like I did mine." Alina took it all, silently, patiently, because she'd heard worse, and she had someone new to fight for now. One evening, she walked past a boutique downtown where expectant mothers tried on designer maternity dresses. She paused outside the window, hand resting on her belly, staring at a mannequin in silk. Behind the glass, a woman with perfect makeup and a wedding ring smiled and laughed with a husband by her side. They picked baby names together, kissed when no one was looking. Alina turned away, because that life wasn't hers. She was building something else, something real. Something forged in nights alone and tears swallowed in silence. That same night, across the city, Damien sat at his boardroom table, surrounded by executives. They talked about mergers, profits, expansion strategies. He nodded when needed, gave instructions, but his mind was elsewhere, still lingering in that tiny apartment, the scent of tea and skin, the soft breath of a woman who had once held him like he was human. He hadn't forgotten her. Couldn't, even though he'd tried. Even though he told himself it was better to walk away. But that night, for no reason he could explain, he asked his driver to turn left instead of right. And suddenly, they were in front of Rose Hall Lounge again. He stepped out, walked through the doors, and asked one more time, voice low, "Is Alina here tonight?" She didn't see him come in. She was behind the bar, rinsing glasses and humming quietly to herself. A lullaby her mother used to sing before the illness took her voice. The night was slow, quiet. The kind that gave her space to breathe, to think, to feel the flutter of life inside her belly like a second heartbeat whispering, "You're not alone." But then everything stilled. The room didn't fall silent. Music still played, ice still clinked, but her world narrowed to the doorway, to the man standing just inside the frame like a shadow returning home. Damien. She froze. He hadn't changed. Same posture, same presence. But this time she noticed things she hadn't before. The tension in his jaw, the hesitation in his steps, the way his eyes searched for something, someone. Then they landed on her. She didn't move. Neither did he. For a moment, the world paused. And in that space, all the silence they had shared came rushing back. The memory of his arms, his voice. That night, her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. Too late. He saw it. His gaze dropped, then lifted. A flicker of disbelief. A step forward. "Elena," he said, voice low but steady. She gripped the edge of the counter. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. She nodded once, quietly. "Yes." A beat of silence. "Is it mine?" 1,000 responses crowded her throat. Fear, defensiveness, pain. But she didn't lie. "Yes," she whispered. He blinked, stepping back as if the word had wind behind it. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't think you'd want to know." "That's not your decision to make." "No," she shot back. "Like it was your decision to disappear?" He didn't flinch, but something broke in his expression. An apology, unspoken and heavy. "I didn't leave because I didn't care," he said. "I left because I cared too much, and I didn't know what to do with it." Elena's heart thudded painfully. "Well, now there's no running." "I'm not running," he said, stepping closer. "I want to help. Whatever you need, money, care, housing, it's yours." She shook her head. "I don't want your pity." "It's not pity." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked. "Some noble gesture? You feel guilty for leaving, so now you want to play hero?" "No," he said firmly. "I want to be a father." Elena stepped back. She wasn't ready for that, for the softness in his voice, for the way he looked at her, not like a burden, but like something rare, something he'd lost before and never thought he'd find again. Her walls went up. "I don't need your protection, Damien. I've been doing this alone. I can finish it alone." "You shouldn't have to." She turned away, wiping the same glass again and again, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do while her heart unraveled. Later that night, long after the bar emptied, she found him sitting in the same corner booth, alone, just like the first time. This time she sat across from him without invitation. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "I don't expect you to, not yet. And I don't want my child raised with conditions or contracts or—" "It's not about control, Elena," he interrupted. "It's about responsibility and love. If you'll let me, I want to be there, not as a CEO, not as if some man throwing money, but as a father, as someone who still thinks about you every single night." Her voice was small. "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because when the whole world expected you to walk away, you stayed." The days that followed were quiet, but not calm. Elena went to work, walked slower, and sat more. The weight she carried now was no longer just physical. It was emotional, raw, tangled in questions without answers. Damien didn't disappear this time. He didn't overwhelm her with gifts or calls. Instead, he waited. Every evening, just outside the bar, his car would pull up. Not flashy, not showy, just there. Sometimes he offered to drive her home. Sometimes he brought dinner. Sometimes he just stood there and said, "How was your day?" Like he wasn't one of the richest men in the city. Like he hadn't built empires with one signature. At first, she resisted. She declined the rides, refused the food, but he didn't push. And little by little, her anger started to feel less like a shield, and more like a weight she no longer needed to carry. One evening, they sat on the stoop outside her apartment building, paper cups of tea warming their hands. The city buzzed around them, but between them was a quiet Elena hadn't felt in months. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of being a mother. I've been one since I was 10, but of letting someone in again, of hoping." Damien looked at her, his gaze steady. "You don't owe me hope, but I'm not asking for forever in one day. I'm just asking to be part of today." She stared at him for a long time, then finally asked, "Why didn't you come back?" "I did," he said softly. "You just weren't there." Later that week, Elena's landlord showed up again, threatening eviction over some imaginary violation. Noise complaints that didn't exist. Hallway clutter that wasn't hers. "I told you this would happen," he barked. "Single moms are bad for property value." She clenched her fists. "I pay my rent, on time. Barely, and that's with tips. What happens when the baby comes and you're stuck inside? You think sympathy's going to cover your bills?" She said nothing, but someone else did. "Actually," came a voice behind them, You won't be needing to talk to Ms. Morgan again." The landlord turned and paled. Damien stood there, tailored and ice-eyed, holding a manila envelope. "I've just bought the building," he said calmly. "Consider this your final walkthrough." Alina's mouth dropped open. "What did you do?" "Protected you," Damien replied. "Just like you protected me." Her eyes filled with frustration. "I didn't ask for that." "No," he said, "but you needed it." That night they argued for hours, in the hallway, in her living room. "I don't want to be rescued," she cried. "I don't want to be someone's charity case." "You're not," Damien fired back. "You're the strongest damn woman I've ever met, but even strong people deserve backup." "I didn't need saving before you," she snapped. "No," he said quietly, "but now you're not alone, and that means you don't have to do everything alone anymore." Silence. Tears ran down her face, hot and humiliating, and he didn't try to wipe them away. He just held her like a man who understood that love wasn't about swooping in. It was about standing beside someone long enough for them to realize they didn't have to fight the world on their own. The next morning, Alina stood in the doorway of his car, her hand resting gently on her stomach. "I'm still scared," she said. Damien nodded. "Me too. But if I say yes, I need to know you won't leave when it gets messy." "I've already seen messy," he said. "And I stayed, didn't I?" She smiled softly. For the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "You're in." It happened without warning. One minute, Alina was standing in line at the grocery store, humming softly as she picked out apples and prenatal vitamins. Next, a sharp pain tore through her lower back, dropping her to her knees. She clutched her belly, gasping. Her vision blurred. The world tilted. Someone shouted. A woman screamed. Another voice yelled for help. But Alina couldn't hear them. All she could feel was the fear, rising like floodwater in her chest, as a warmth spread between her legs. Too much, too fast. "Not now," she begged. "Please, not now." The ambulance came quickly. The paramedics spoke in urgent voices she couldn't fully understand. Her hands never left her belly, not once. At the hospital, everything was bright and white and cold. A flurry of tests, ultrasound screens. Machines are beeping like alarms. A nurse held her hand as she cried quietly into the scratchy pillow. "You're 32 weeks, the doctor said gently. "The baby's in distress. We'll need to prepare for an emergency delivery. Do you have someone we can call?" Alina tried to speak, but all that came out was a name. Damien. He was in a board meeting when his phone buzzed. His assistant had strict instructions. No interruptions during quarterly reviews. But when she peeked in, pale and wide-eyed, holding her phone up, he knew. The documents dropped from his hands. He didn't say a word. He just walked out, got in the car, and told his driver, "Hospital, now." When he arrived, he barely heard the receptionist. He found the nurse's station. "Where is she?" he asked. "Sir? Where is she?" They pointed. He was gone before they finished the sentence. He found her in the recovery room, pale, eyes shut. A monitor beside her was flashing quiet rhythms. There was an incubator in the corner, and in it, small, fragile, wrapped in blankets, was a life he hadn't even met yet, already fighting to stay. A nurse whispered, "It's a girl." Damien walked over slowly, one step at a time, as if the world might collapse beneath his feet. She was so small, but she was breathing, and that was enough to bring him to his knees. Later, Alina woke to the sound of humming, soft, steady. She turned her head and saw him. Damien, seated in a plastic chair beside her bed, holding their daughter's tiny hand through the incubator glass. He didn't see her eyes open. He was too focused, too still, too broken. She didn't say anything. She just listened. He was humming the same lullaby she used to hum behind the bar, the same one she thought no one ever noticed. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Hey," she whispered hoarsely. He turned instantly. His eyes were red, but his smile was real. "You're okay," he said, rushing to her side. "You're okay. She's okay." "I was so scared," Alina breathed. "I know," he said, taking her hand gently. "But you did it. You both did." She squeezed his fingers. "Did you mean it? All the things you said before?" "Every word." She looked at the incubator. "Do you think we'll be good at this?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "But I know I'll love her. Every single day. And I'll never let her feel alone. Not like we did." Elena nodded, eyes full. "And what about me?" He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "You," he whispered, "are my beginning. You gave me something no amount of wealth ever did." "What's that?" He smiled. "A reason to come home." The days after the delivery were a blur of beeping monitors, hourly feedings, and whispered prayers. Alina spent hours in a rocking chair beside the incubator, her hands pressed gently against the glass. Damien was never far. He brought coffee, blankets, updates from doctors, and his presence. Steady, quiet, always there. Their daughter, whom they named Isla, fought with a fierce heart. At just over 3 pounds, she was a warrior. Tiny, trembling, but strong. Every breath she took was a declaration. Every heartbeat, a miracle. One evening, 2 weeks later, Alina stood holding Isla for the first time without gloves or wires. She was warm, real, alive. Her tiny hand wrapped tightly around Alina's pinky, and tears slipped down her cheek, but this time, not from fear. "I never thought I'd get here," she whispered. Damien stood in the doorway, watching. He hadn't said much that day, but his eyes were full. She turned toward him. "I was going to raise her alone," Alina said softly. "I thought that was the brave thing, but maybe letting someone love me is braver." He stepped forward, and maybe loving someone enough to want them safe is the truest kind of courage. They stood together watching the child they created breathe steadily in her mother's arms. Then, without pomp or perfection, Damien pulled something small from his coat pocket. No diamonds, no velvet box, just a simple silver ring on a chain he'd carried for weeks. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. "Alina," he said, voice low, rough with emotion. "You saved my life the night you sat beside me. Not with medicine, not with answers, but with presence, with stillness. You gave me a reason to feel again. And now, you've given me a daughter, a family, a future." Her lips trembled. "I want to spend every day proving to you that love isn't about rescue or power. It's about staying. Through storms, through silence, through the mess. Will you let me stay?" She stared at him, then looked at Isla, tiny, sleeping peacefully against her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "not because I need saving, but because you're the only man I want to walk this road with." 6 months later, a soft breeze danced through the garden as guests gathered around white canopies and candlelit tables. There was no grand wedding, no press. Just a small ceremony under the sky with Isla giggling in her grandmother's lap and Jeremy throwing flower petals with exaggerated seriousness. Alina wore a simple cream dress. Damien wore a suit he barely noticed. And when they exchanged vows, no one in the audience moved. Not even the wind dared interrupt. After the kiss, after the laughter, after the dance between a brother and sister who had once survived off scraps and dreams, Alina stood on the balcony alone, watching the stars. Damien came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. Isla slept in a crib nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling like waves on a calm sea. "You okay?" he whispered. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm finally home." She didn't chase wealth. She didn't beg for love. She stood her ground. Pregnant, alone, invisible to a world that only applauds power. But kindness has a memory, and one act of compassion changed everything. Not because she was perfect, not because he needed saving. In the distance, a girl with a past like Alina's walked past the gates of the reception, a pizza box in her hand, earbuds in, head down. She looked tired, invisible, forgotten. But just before she passed, Alina stepped out and offered her a glass of water and a place to sit. No questions, no judgment, just kindness. Because once, not long ago, a girl like her had done the same for a broken man in a bar. And it had changed everything.